Hi, everybody. Welcome to the next edition of the Asia Ventilation Forum, or the AVF Behind the Scenes ICU Stories podcast. My name is Jason Phua, and today we are really glad to have Professor Kathy Roven to talk about how to set up a critical care research network. So, Prof. Roven, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
So maybe I should just introduce you. Prof. Roven is the director of ICNAC, and that's the Intensive Care National Audit and Research Centre, and she's also the founder. She's honorary professor at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and she's adjunct professor of research at Monash University in Australia. So, Prof, just maybe to start it off, want to tell us a little bit of what ICNAC is all about?
Sure, absolutely. So ICNAC, the Intensive Care National Audit and Research Centre, as you say, is an independent, not-for-profit scientific organisation that's been set up to facilitate improvements in the structure, process, outcomes and experiences of critical care for patients and for those who care for them. And that for those who care for them is deliberately sort of double-edged. Obviously, those who care for them, the staff in critical care units, and those who care for them, i.e. the loved ones of those poor patients who become critically ill. So we see ourselves as a very holistic view in terms of evaluating and supporting critical care.
Right. And I've been looking at the websites. We've spoken as well, and your history is fascinating. Your history, as in ICNAC's history, and your Professor Kathy Roven's history, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I saw that you first proposed to set up this national center for comparative audit and evaluative research way back 1991 on behalf of your Intensive Care Society. And then 3 years later, 1994, ICNAC was finally set up together with a case mix program. You call it CMP. Could you talk us through it? What inspired you to do this?
So I had done a PhD that I was doing at the University of Oxford, pretty much on the epidemiology of adult critical care. There had never been an attempt to collate information across critical care units in the UK. And I was employed into a research job to do that epidemiology. And as we progressed through collecting data at that point from about 26 intensive care units, it became clear that if you applied the tools of good data collection, good epidemiological sort of scientific rigor, you could actually make comparisons. And obviously it had followed on from the work of Bill Knaus in America, with the development of the original Apache and then the Apache 2 method, the acute physiology and chronic health evaluation, the second sort of version of that. And so we were looking to see to what extent one could use risk prediction models to predict outcomes and then benchmark critical care units on their actual outcomes. And so we discovered that the risk model, when calibrated to the UK, actually could be a useful tool. And I was sort of about 2/3 through my PhD when it became clear that if I worked with the profession, the policymakers, the managers, the staff, the patients, the public in critical care, one could bring together the notion of an ongoing sort of assessment of critical care units. I think it was based on the premise that people are critically ill in critical care, that some people die, but maybe the notion back then of whether a death was actually sort of expected or not was not necessarily part of the day-to-day working of critical care. And perhaps if there was some way of assessing or looking back retrospectively and trying to understand whether death rates were higher than expected, and if they were higher than expected, was there a way to bring people together to discuss why that might be and implement improvements to improve the survival rate?
Wow. So you said 26 ICUs. many of us, we can't even set up a database in one ICU, let alone 26 ICUs. You mentioned patients. I assume you have been communicating, or you were communicating with policymakers, funders, the ICU directors, their family members, all of the above, not to mention the data collectors, the data dictionaries, maybe the electronic systems. Can you talk us through the hurdles that you face? How do you
Sure.
even do all this? Yeah.
I could tell you it was really easy, and I went from 26 units to 300 intensive care units, and there was never a hurdle. Of course, there was a hurdle at every stage. So first of all, when we put the proposal for ICNARC to our government, they weren't immediately receptive. It was a new idea, the concept of sort of benchmarking. This is back in 1994, or sorry, 1991. So it took us, from that first proposal in 1991 to actually achieving some pump priming funds in 1994. So it took us 3 years to persuade the government, the policymakers, that we could essentially set this up and then make it self-financing, because that was the key thing. It had to be self-financing. It couldn't be something that could be repeatedly paid for by the government, by the centre, by our Department of Health. So what were the hurdles? The hurdles were about, for me, setting up a club that people wanted to take part in, that people felt was doing something that was worthwhile and valuable to the kind of wider effort in critical care. So it was about persuading people that it was okay to share data. And if we were going to share data, that data needed to be accurate. And so there was a lot around, ensuring that there were both definitions and rules for the data that were being sort of collected. In those days, collected. These days, a lot more is captured. So that's been a big difference from the sort of manual data collection to the digital sort of capturing of data. But it was about convincing people that it wasn't threatening to share information, to reveal your outcomes, to make comparisons and try and learn. So that was probably winning hearts and minds. What was the first thing? The second thing was every intensive care unit in the UK at that point collected some data to some degree. If you look at an intensive care unit, they are very data-rich environments. Charting goes on to monitor the progress of a patient. So if you could somehow harness that data collecting environment into perhaps identifying a subset of data that could be shared, that really was the sort of the idea. And that by sharing data captured in an accurate way, you could increase the value of the local data. So it was like the same amount of effort, but an additional benefit through sharing. So that was really the winning of hearts and minds. The harder bit was then saying, and we'd like you to pay a subscription to participate in receiving these results. And I was lucky that the 26 critical care units that participated in the original research study had found the feedback of the results from that beneficial. So they were keen to kind of join, if you like, the transition from my original PhD research study into, if you like, early adopters of what you might call the registry or the database that we were trying to develop to underpin ICNARC's work. So that was a sort of a second barrier, was trying to identify. So I had to make a kind of a punt that all critical care units eventually would take part, and how much money one might need to run such an operation. And therefore I could actually then levy a very small subscription at each intensive care unit. And so we were sort of the early subs, and to this day they remain low, are only about 0.01% of the total critical care unit budget. So in the great scheme of things, it didn't feature as a huge financial burden when you compared it alongside, the very important monies that are spent on equipment and staffing and drugs, etc., for critical care. So it wasn't taking a large amount of money out of sort of clinical critical care. So that was sort of then getting it financed. I think another challenge was I was a woman. Back in the day, it wasn't as good to be a woman as it is now, and we still have barriers and hurdles about being women, but there's greater equality now than there was then. And also, I was the wrong kind of doctor. I wasn't a medical doctor, I was a PhD doctor. And so there was a sort of trying to sort of, become part of a wider, what you might call multidisciplinary team. So I think critical care was used to being multidisciplinary. And then what I was trying to do was bring in a few other disciplines into that multidisciplinary team, particularly those of epidemiology and statistics, and trying to kind of, if you like, reveal the benefit of bringing in those disciplines to, critical care, and showing the importance of well-presented analyses that are informative and helpful. And then just involving everybody along the way. So, trying to be as inclusive as possible. Did we meet some big hurdles? Absolutely. Was it tough at time? Absolutely. But those people who know me well will know that I'm a bit dogged. If I get something that I'm set out to do, I will do it to the best of my ability. But there were times where it was tough enough that I might have given up the ghost, but I kept going. And I think to this day, I'm incredibly, inordinately proud of all the people that have worked at ICNARC and the work that we've done. It's very much a collective effort for those of us centrally in ICNARC with all our wider critical care colleagues across the UK.
And 3 decades on, the work that you have done at ICNARC, it's moved from Apache 2 score and audits to really groundbreaking randomized controlled trials. If you don't mind, I'm just going to quote a few, right? Like the Pac-Man trial that's compared the Swan-Ganz catheter versus no Swan-Ganz catheter, no difference, and people stopped using it. Calories trial that actually showed that there's no real difference between enteral and parenteral nutrition. The Promise trial, which was one of the 3 trials that killed oligo-directed therapy, if you can say it. The 65S trial that's now makes me think that maybe elderly people don't need that much of a high blood pressure, and all your COVID stuff, your REMAP-CAP work, etc., etc. So, my question is, it's not just audit; it's quality improvement, and it's also trials, randomized controlled trials, research. And do you see it as a spectrum? Are they one and the same? Is there a difference?
The way that we would see it at ICNARC is we're interested in informing quality critical care. And, one way of looking at that is it's all about getting the right patient to the right place at the right time, getting the right care and getting the right outcomes. And when you think about quality, we tend to establish what quality care is through research. And then we want to assess the quality of care through audit. And then we want to promote quality through sharing information. So that's probably how we see it at ICNARC, that all of those activities, we do research to establish what quality care is or is not. We assess quality through our audit activities using the database. And then we promote quality, and that might be scientific publications, but it also is every critical care unit will receive a quarterly quality report from the audit that incorporates a number of potential quality indicators that have actually been generated by staff in critical care units. So we very much sort of, co-produce, co-design our reporting. So I think we see it all about trying to enhance quality in critical care. And I think it's important to also be aware that we would define quality as the effectiveness of care. So we want to be giving effective and safe care, but we're also very interested in the humanity of care. And that's that care is delivered, safely with dignity to people. And then we're also interested in the equity of care, which is that critical care is available to everybody. And we're very lucky within the NHS that care is provided free at the point of use. Obviously, we pay for our National Health Service through taxation, but those elements of effectiveness, humanity of care, and the equity of care also pervade all our work.
Right. And can you share with us what do you think are the key ingredients for audits or databases or even research? Yeah.
So I think it's about optimizing the use of data. So the reason that we are able to do randomized controlled trials in 100, 150, 170 different intensive care units, so large multi-center trials, is we do data-enabled trials. So we all know that the point of burden is obviously the data collection. So if you can actually use data linkage, so we never duplicate data collection. So even back in the first trial we did, Pac-Man, a proportion of the data for Pac-Man came from the audit database. So we have the same, if you like, strict criteria that most people would impose upon data in research. We impose that same strict criteria, those same strict criteria to the data that we get for what you might call the audit database. Then they become possible to link and be able to be used for all purposes. We're very lucky in the NHS that we have a unique identifier called the NHS number, and that allows us to link data sources. So in a research study, we may only capture additional data that are required to answer the research question, and then we will link to the data of that patient in the database, obviously in all circumstances with the governance and ethics and everything else that we require in place for that purpose. So I think it's about maximizing, enhancing, data enabling, efficient design. I think that's the helpful building block to do these big, large multi-center trials and large observational studies and other surveys and, qualitative. So we're very much a mixed methods organization. So we do a lot of qualitative work, but it's all about if you like, serving the one purpose to, enhance the quality of critical care.
Right, thanks. And one thing that you said, actually two things that you said struck me. At the beginning, you said that when you talk about caregivers, you're talking about the patient's loved ones as well. And the other thing you said was you're talking about the humanity of critical care. How does IGNAC help the caregivers and enhance humanity?
So in every research study that we do, we'll have a very multidisciplinary team, and co-applicants on our research grants involve very much public and patients. So they're equal partners at the table. They help us design our studies. So that's one way, very much. IGNAC, as I said, is a not-for-profit organization, a charitable organization. So we have a board of management that form the trustees of our charity, and at the table, helping to guide IGNAC's direction are trustees who are just people. They're members of the public. So as well as having critical care professionals, we also have people and public, very much at the top of IGNAC's governing body or board of management. Another way in which we involve patients, public, family, staff, is to make sure that those elements of care, the humanity of care, are actually on our agenda for, wanting to enhance quality. So there was the wonderful work that was done by Darren Hyland with developing the family satisfaction questionnaire. We were keen to understand its psychometric properties, its measurement properties in the UK. So we did a research study, the family reported experiences evaluation, and we're now taking those research results and hopefully transitioning them into a family satisfaction audit. So moving from the research, understanding that the measure is a useful measure once it's been recalibrated to the UK, and then applying that measure now, we hope to roll out later this year or early next year, a family satisfaction audit to go alongside our patient outcome audit, so that actually a unit will be able to not only understand whether it's getting good outcomes for patients and delivering good care processes, but also whether the family members, family in the widest context, the loved one of a patient, so not necessarily a next of kin. And I think that's a really important part from the research study. We learned that the family members of non-survivors were more satisfied than the family members of survivors, which kind of felt quite telling. Something about the information giving that was done with the families of non-survivors was perhaps more intense and more fulfilling for those families than the family members of survivors. So, perhaps providing more information on care and decision-making to the family members of non-survivors, of survivors, might enhance their sort of satisfaction. I think, if you don't work in it, so I don't work in it, I don't work in a critical care unit. I've been into many, and I spend time, exposing myself to seeing all the great work that critical care colleagues do. It's quite an alien place. So I imagine the first time you turn up as a family member and, you're full of worry and concern and busy people are delivering critical care, you can imagine how that disconnect occurs, and how not being told anything is frightening for family members, and staff are perhaps concerned about what they should and shouldn't say, and maybe a sort of a chasm develops there that can be overcome. There are places that are very good at it, there are places that are less good at it, and I think the kind of audit that I feel we like to try and get involved in is getting people on the basis of data to talk to each other. You're getting good family satisfaction results. How do you do that? Because we could learn from you. So I think it's about, trying to bring data and evidence into the area where it can enhance communication between different places. We know that the culture of two different intensive care units in the same institution can vary markedly. There was the work done by David Huang in Pittsburgh, where he showed that, two different intensive care units had very, very different cultures, in the same hospital. So I think it's just worth being aware that if we have the evidence base to actually kind of facilitate conversations about how we do things differently, and some of those differences might enhance things, and I think that's what we're about, trying to provide that evidence for those sort of conversations.
Right. And you started off by talking about the hurdles that you faced, and then you also touched on what you think are the ingredients for a good network. Still, I think many of us are flabbergasted, right? How do you go from 26 ICUs to more than 300, close to 200 ICUs per study? How did your team scale until today? One of the biggest ICUs research networks in the world and the most successful.
So as an epidemiologist, I was very, very keen eventually to get what you might call representative coverage, so that when you produce statistics. So when I came into critical care in 1987, all the research that was done predominantly was done in teaching hospitals. And the first question I asked as an epidemiologist was, is everybody treated in a teaching hospital? And they went, no. About 20% of patients go to teaching hospital ICUs, and about 80% go to non-teaching hospital ICUs. And I went, so why do we do all the research in the teaching hospitals? So I brought, I guess, an epidemiologist sort of naive view to it. So one of the things I was really keen to do was to sort of democratize research and make audit representative. How do we go from 26 to 300 odd? Winning people over. So I was very, very sure very, very early on that this would not be mandated. I am just, anyone who knows me personally will know that I don't like to be told to do something. I will eventually maybe decide I'm going to do something myself. Well, I felt like that about the case mix program. I wanted staff in units to want to join. And what we did was prove our worth over time. And it was over time. So you've got to bear in mind, ICNOC's now in its 29th year. And probably for the last decade, we've had 100% coverage. So 20 years is quite a slow uptake, you might argue. But every single, we all know about adoption curves. You know, you've got the early adopters, and then you have the laggards. Well, we had the laggards. We had the people who, you know, didn't want to join. I think a lot of them eventually joined, perhaps not so sold into the, case mix program and the assessing quality through audit, but we then made it, if you like, a link to taking part in the research. So we don't, nobody is made or to take part in the audit or the research, but actually a lot of the units wanted to participate in the research, and to participate in the research, you had to be participating in the audit because of that linkage through data. So I think, you know, some of the last people joined because they could see the value of the two rather than the value of either one. But it didn't happen overnight by any stretch of the imagination. And we always tried to, as we did through the COVID-19 pandemic, we tried to listen to what people were saying, what we were doing right, what we were doing wrong, what we weren't doing. And we spent a lot of time focusing on what we were doing wrong or what we weren't doing, trying to change our ways, trying to deliver the services that critical care wanted. And I think it's winning hearts and minds. I meet occasionally now older doctors who were junior doctors in the early days of ICNOC, and they go, "I hated your data collection, Kathy Rowan, I had to do it, I was told to do it," sort of type thing. And I think it's now become part and parcel of delivering quality critical care, is to capture data about that care, the outcomes from that care, so that we can understand how to improve it.
And you mentioned COVID-19, right? My God, the amount of science that came out from the United Kingdom in healthcare, in critical care, it's I must say, as an Asian, that we are so grateful for the British, and I'm sure ICNOC was involved. How did you convert this threat into an opportunity? Yeah.
So I think, like everybody else, as 2019 was drawing to a close, we became aware that there was something happening in China. As we moved into early 2020, we have very close relationships with our politicians and policymakers and in our Department of Health and Social Care. And they came to us, first of all, sort of saying, well, looks like we've got a virus, looks like it causes something like influenza. Could you do us a report on sort of viral pneumonia so we can get some sort of sense about, the characteristics of these patients, the duration of their stay, the kind of organ support they're going to need, and the likely outcomes. And so, we dug out the 5,000 or 6,000 viral pneumonias in the database and provided our policymakers a report. And that sort of got us alerted to the fact that, we had to be on the lookout for the first COVID-19 cases in critical care. The way that then worked was we asked our critical care units, as soon as they saw a case, to upload the barest amount of data. So their admission number, the fact that they had COVID-19, and the date of their admission. We asked them to upload that data almost as soon as it happened onto our audit platform. And what that allowed us to do was daily give our NHS executive colleagues, our Department of Health and Social Care colleagues, the numbers that were appearing in critical care. And I remember we did our first report on 20 patients, and we just sort of thought, wow, they don't look anything like viral pneumonia. That was the first thing. That was absolutely clear. And there probably won't be very many of them. And now we're sort of, 50,000 patients later. It's been, an onslaught of cases, and it's been, incredibly burdensome for our critical care colleagues. It's been, horrendous at the critical care unit level for patients, for families, for staff. But what we tried to do was weekly put out a report on all the cases that we had data for. So our data clerks in the critical care units, who are very much employed locally by their units, were absolutely incredible, keeping the data flowing into ICNARC. And then what we did was do weekly reports on the epidemiology and outcomes of COVID-19. And we would then follow Twitter over the weekend and see all the comments and questions and what about and why and who. And then the following week, we would add that to the report. So we had a very much an evolving report, trying to deliver the answers to the questions that our clinical colleagues were sort of posing. As I say, Twitter was a great medium for that. And then we're very, very lucky in the UK that we have something called the National Institute for Health Research. And what that does is it funds very good research on improving the NHS, but it also funds a clinical research network. So the way of thinking that is the resources to deliver research as well as the resources to undertake research, conduct research. So I, as a researcher, might get a grant for a particular project, but the sites will get resources to deliver that research study. And I think this paid dividends during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we were able to set up or ramp up very, very quickly, very, very important studies for COVID-19. And I was involved in the trial steering committee of the recovery trial, and that was a phenomenal undertaking and led to many effective therapies being identified for COVID-19. And then I was also involved as the Method Centre for REMAP-CAP. And again, there was a sort of synergy between recovery and REMAP-CAP, because obviously a patient has a trajectory through the hospital where the recovery trial might enroll them, and then into the intensive care unit where REMAP-CAP might enroll them. So there was a lot of communication between the two trials. But again, if somebody got critically ill, it was important that we knew what were the effective interventions for the critically ill. And I'm incredibly proud of being in the United Kingdom during the pandemic. I like you, I stand in awe, and as I watched all my colleagues deliver so much important global information for COVID-19. And that's, as a researcher, as the ICNARC director, I'm here to serve. I'm here to try and help people understand through evidence. And incredibly proud of our staff, because they worked above and beyond to try and deliver to our clinical colleagues, both nationally and internationally.
Yes, yes. And as a recipient of the good work that you have done, I can say that we look forward to your studies. And really, when the papers came out, it completely changed our practice, and we see how patients get better. So it is a big deal. It is a big deal.
I'm thrilled, when what your life is about is trying to improve care and outcomes. The idea that those influencers were as far and wide as they could be. And I have to say, ICNARC really, it came into its own in the pandemic. It was there, it was ready, it could ramp up, it could deliver. And all it needed was the commitment of the staff working at ICNARC, because they worked overtime and some. But it was great to see the engine room work and deliver. So yes, I was very, very proud of my colleagues. They did a phenomenal job.
Thanks. I have one final question, Prof. I'm sure somewhere out there would be Prof. Cathy Rowan wannabe, maybe an ICU staff or somebody in epidemiology trying to do something along the lines of audits or quality improvement or research. What advice would you give this person?
So I was really, really lucky. So let me just tell you a little story. Every Sunday at about 4:30 in the afternoon, I have Zoom tea. I'm an English person, so I drink tea and I eat a little bit of cake. with my 85-year-old mentor. So this is my mentor who taught me everything I needed to know about intensive care when I came into. So that really is just to point out to you that having a mentor or some mentors is really, really important, to learn what's gone before and to have people who are prepared to talk about what didn't work rather than what did work. So, you know, I am 29 years. I can tell you all the good bits, but I can tell you a lot more about the bad bits. And so a lot of it is about understanding and talking to other people. Another one would be bring people with you. You know, colleagues, collaborations should be fun. You know, I've made so many friends through critical care audit and research across the world, including your good self, Jason, you know, and that's fabulous. And thinking that wide and sort of, you know, working with people together to deliver things would be another one. Don't bite off too much. So ICNARC started, as you said, the case mix program, our national clinical audit was what we started with. We now run 4 national clinical audits, and as you said, a large number of various sort of randomized and non-randomized critical care studies nationally and internationally. But we started small and we got our building blocks in place. So I would say there's something about, you know, biting off something that you can do and can deliver on. Everything counts, everything, all of us are making a contribution. So, you know, but I think it's about all of those pieces together. But I try as hard as possible. My biggest joy is the people I mentor, the people I have mentored and the people I continue to mentor. That's my biggest joy, is watching the next generation and the next generations come through. And they've got different challenges. You know, we can argue now with clinical information systems and the whole sort of digitization. There's almost more data than we perhaps know what to do with. There's a lot of excitement about artificial intelligence and other sort of, you know, ways of analyzing data. But we've got to kind of still go through those same journeys about what's useful to us, what's not, what's, you know, so I think, you know, it's about, yeah, get a good mentor. I was really, really lucky. Mentors, and then colleagues and collaborators that you like working with. My view is you've got to, at the end of a bad day, be able to sit down with a beer with, you know, your collaborators and go, right, how are we going to get out of this mess?
And on that very inspiring note, we end this AVF podcast. But thank you, Professor Rovan, for spending time with us.
Oh, an absolute pleasure. An absolute pleasure. Lovely to see you, Jason. I hope in reality, all this virtual stuff is not good for us. We all need to see each other.
It's about time, right?
It's definitely about time. I can't wait.
Yeah.
2022 and 2023. I can't wait.
Yes, I'm sure. And so to the audience out there, this has been the AVF podcast. We are available on YouTube, Spotify, and till the next time, please feel free to spread this, share this, like this, whatever. Take care. Bye-bye, and it's about time.
Bye.
Bye.